Thanks for tuning in to episode 5 of Chrontendo. Well, this episode is going to be a big one. In fact, the months of September and October 1985 are probably the most significant 8 weeks in the system's lifespan. 3 major events will occur this episode. First, we'll see the release of a title that will virtually come to define the Famicom and the N.E.S. system. Secondly, we'll see Nintendo take the first step in its effort to become the global leader in home video game consoles. And finally, we'll see the emergence of a rivalry that will last for nearly the next 20 years. Most of the games covered in this episode are Japanese-only releases. Only 4 were released in the United States. But we will see the emergence of 3 new publishers for the Famicom. Our first game this episode is Irem's 10-Yard Fight, a port of their 1983 arcade game. This was the last game released in August 1985. You can choose your level here from high school all the way up to Super Bowl team. High school is quite easy. Super Bowl is quite difficult. We'll try college here. Not too bad. So this is definitely the first American football game released for the Famicom, and quite frankly there really weren't a whole lot of football games out there even for the arcade before this game came out in 1983. Why is this? Well, American football is kind of a complicated game, and it's probably pretty hard to make a video game out of it. Nowadays, of course, football games are quite popular. Back in 1983, however, making a game that sort of accurately reproduced the game of football would be pretty difficult. In fact, the original arcade version of this game was quite a bit different. They actually added a number of features for the 1985 Famicom version. So how does it play? Well, don't be fooled, this game is quite simple. Usually what you do is you throw the ball to one of your lateral receivers and then have them just run up the field. Of course, the other team will try to tackle you, but if you get a good head start, it'll take them quite a while to catch up with you, and you can also evade their tackles by moving the D-pad from left to right. Obviously, of course, I've gotten a first down here. And once you get all the way to the goal, you get a touchdown. And you're even allowed to kick a field goal. Basically, you just want to position the arrow right in the middle of the goal post there, then kick the ball. Now, defense is actually a little bit trickier. Notice there's a timer, but it's going much faster than real time. Once you actually win a game, you'll then go on to the next level. For example, if you start off high school, you win, you'll go to college, all the way to Super Bowl. So for defense, you have to hit either the A or the B button to select the left or the right player, and then you try to tackle whoever has the ball. I personally find tackling a bit tricky. A lot of times I try to do a running tackle and throw myself at the guy, and he just misses completely. Occasionally something interesting will happen. For example, you'll be able to intercept a pass, like happens here. So this is a pretty fun game. I mean, it's reasonably addictive. It's not very complicated. Temco Bowl would come out a few years later, and of course it was a much better game. But not surprisingly, this game was released in the United States. In fact, it was actually even one of the launch titles for the N.E.S. in America. This is Namco's Battle City, with one of the most minimalistic musical themes you'll find on any Nintendo game. And this is actually a remake of a 1980 arcade game from Namco called Tank Battalion. Here's the original arcade version. This came out right around the same time as Pac-Man, maybe a few months after Pac-Man. Namco added a number of features and obviously updated the graphics and the sound to make Battle City. Added such things as power-ups like a little grenade which blows up everybody on the screen. And the object of this game is to protect your little gray eagle at the bottom there from being blown up by one of the enemy tanks. In order to clear the screen, you have to destroy a certain number of each kind of tank. Altogether, there's 35 levels. After you complete them, the game repeats itself. There are sort of your standard tanks, and there's the more highly armored tanks, like that one up there that's sort of flashing. Those take a few hits to kill. There's the fast-moving tanks. And this game can actually be a bit tough, especially in the later levels, because you sort of have to not only watch out for your own hide, but make sure while you're not working in one area, a tank sneaks down and blows up your home base there. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this game is it actually has a two-player cooperative option, where two players can actually be playing at the same time, working together, something that wasn't really seen in a whole lot of video games at this time. Really, the two-player cooperative mode is really the way to go with this game. There's also a construction mode, sort of like Excite Bike. But really, this is not a bad game, but you can sort of tell that Namco didn't really put too much time and energy into this. Alright, here is the big one, Super Mario Bros. This game starts off with one of the most memorable video game music themes of all time. Of course, it's not just the music that makes this game great. In fact, virtually everything about it is great. Now, if you're watching this, I assume you don't really need an introduction to this game. This is the game that really sort of put the Nintendo on the map in the United States. This was a launch title for the Nintendo in the U.S., and in a lot of versions of the N.E.S. it was actually included as a pack-in game. It's often said that Super Mario Bros. Is the biggest selling video game of all time. Some people say that's not really fair because that's including the copies that were actually packaged with the N.E.S. system. Of course, if you don't count this game, then Super Mario Bros. 3 is actually the biggest selling video game of all time. Either way, this game was a huge hit. The influence of Super Mario Bros. On the video game world was enormous. This was the game that really helped sell the NES in the United States, and thus it sort of helped revive the video game market in the US. Additionally, the quality and ambition of this game really sort of transformed what people thought could be done on home video game consoles. Now, Super Mario Bros. Was not the first side-scrolling platform game. There had been others before this, and it was sort of a minor genre, especially on computers and in the arcades. Probably the most successful side-scrolling platformer prior to this was 1984's Pac-Land. Probably the high point of these early arcade side-scrollers was Capcom's Ghosts and Goblins, which hit the arcades right about the same time that Super Mario Bros. Came out on the Famicom. Ghosts and Goblins also had a very similar Rescue the Princess kind of plot. Of course, the platforming elements in both these games were pretty simple compared to Super Mario Bros. We won't see it happen immediately, of course, but due to the success of this game, side-scrolling and platforming and that sort of thing really kind of became this dominant genre for console games for quite a while. This really lasted up until the 90s. I'm sure you recall Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog series being quite popular in the 90s. It would really take the PlayStation and the transition to 3D graphics to sort of cause the platformer to lose its popularity. Of course, they still make Mario Bros. Games to this day. Again, note how great Koji Kondo's music is for this game. suddenly it changes from being so sunny and peppy to being more mysterious and dark. Really helps set the mood for this level. Of course, the level design is great too, so there's a black background, the colors are all blue, kind of mysterious looking. How many other really video games at this time, especially on a Nintendo, really had that kind of ability to like set a mood like this? You certainly couldn't say the same about games like Flappy. And even Nintendo's games, like Wrecking Crew, didn't really have the same successful fusion of visuals and music. Super Mario Bros. Borrows a lot of things from other games, like the invulnerability power-up obviously comes originally from Pac-Man. And from games like Tower of Druaga, it adds the concept of lots of hidden things. There are all kinds of things like this hidden coin room that you might not find the first few times you play this game. And of course, one of the most well-known hidden things in this game is the warp rooms. This of course will allow the experienced gamer to play the entire game a little more quickly without having to go through every single level. And it is pretty cool the first time you happen to actually find a warp zone. There are several of them hidden throughout the game. Another really notable thing about Super Mario Bros. Is its general cohesiveness. If you look at a lot of games like Kung Fu, for example, I mean the enemies really don't seem to have anything in common. They're sort of random things kind of thrown in there. Whereas here everything seems to come from the same alien world. And there's sort of like a logical progression from the enemies. For example, the Koopas you can jump on and kill them. These Spinies you cannot. Later we'll have Buzzy Beetles which you can step on, but fireballs won't harm. And the levels all transition together nicely. You know, at the end of one level you crawl into a pipe and then it plops you down into the ocean. And then at the end of that level you crawl into a pipe and it takes back out onto dry land. And the world in Super Mario Bros. Is amazingly well realized. There actually is a real internal logic to it. Even though the levels are always changing and there's a lot of variety in what you do, nothing ever really seems out of place or inappropriate. Playing this game you really sort of get a feel for what the Mushroom Kingdom is like. The idea behind this level is you do a lot of jumping on turtle shells and running. Of course I'm not really doing that very well at the moment. This game does definitely keep throwing new things at you, and the difficulty level ramps up very, very gently. Super Mario Bros. Is not really a hard game, but it is such a fun game that even the most hardcore gamers don't really complain about it being too easy. And Super Mario Bros. Is also a very fair game. You never really die because of something that's the game's fault. It's pretty much always your fault. You never really feel, oh, you know, the game is cheating or something, or the controls are bad. One thing about Super Mario Bros. Is that the controls are very good. Definitely the early Nintendo game designers had difficulty getting games to control well, but Nintendo themselves certainly had no such problems with this game because it handles better than just about any early Famicom game, and better than actually a lot of the later games as well. Playing through all these Famicom games, I'm actually often amazed at how often bad controls is a serious issue with these games, but with Super Mario Bros. The controls are always buttery smooth. Every fourth level is a dungeon level, which actually features a boss at the end. Remember, at this stage, having bosses at the end of levels was not yet a video game cliché. I mean, sure, games did have them, but a lot of games didn't, as in fact most of the games we've been playing on the Famicom so far didn't really have a boss. And of course, every time you defeat King Koopa, you get the great, sorry, our princess is in another castle bit of business. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things this game borrowed from Tower of Druaga was having very little sort of hidden things scattered throughout the game. For example, here's one of the little hidden vines you can find that takes to a special little coin world. Some of the other ones, of course, have you jumping around on little clouds. But this definitely adds to the game's replayability. You can play this game again and again, you know, keep trying to find more things, and of course collect more coins as well. One of the things Super Mario Bros. Added to the video game lexicon was sort of running around collecting some sort of weird little objects like a coin or something like that. So if I were to sum up some of the ways this game influenced future video games, we'd say first of all it did in fact help popularize the side-scrolling platformer, as well as side-scrolling in general. It helped popularize games with some sort of rudimentary plot and some sort of concrete goal at the end of the game. Also quite important were the idea of power-ups, such as the mushroom, or the temporary invulnerability afforded by the stars, the collecting of random trinkets such as coins, the various hidden bonus objects and rooms found throughout the game, and the fact this game just raised the bar in terms of graphics, controls, music, and design for the Famicom. Additionally, the success of Super Mario Bros. Encouraged Nintendo to work on more large, ambitious games. Their next big project will be coming out in February of 1986. So here we have the final level of the game with the final boss, the real King Koopa. All the others were just fakes apparently. You kill him in pretty much the same way you kill all the rest, and then you get to meet the real Princess Mushroom. She's actually quite a bit taller than I expected, and really not that good looking. Of course, this being an early title, Nintendo couldn't just have the game in there. You didn't get to play a second, more difficult version of Super Mario Bros. So there we have Super Mario Bros., the game that helped usher in the age of modern-day video gaming, and the game that really took the Famicom from its infancy to its adulthood. It won't happen immediately, of course, but over the next few months we'll slowly start to see Super Mario Bros. Influence creeping into other Famicom games. Hopefully you're enjoying some of the craziest video game opening music ever, along with a very cute little opening scene here. Yes, this is Pooyan, a port of Konami's 1982 arcade game. Coming out only around a week or so after Super Mario Bros., this must seem like a bit of a disappointment in comparison, but really it shouldn't be. It's actually a very cute little arcade game, and this is a very accurate port. The graphics have been downgraded just a little bit, but the game pretty much plays exactly like the arcade version. The subject matter of this game is a little unusual. You play a mother pig trying to protect your young ones against an endless onslaught of ravenous wolves. Oddly enough, the wolves are attacking by using helium balloons. The object, of course, is to prevent the wolves from reaching the ground. If they do, they'll climb up the ladders and begin harassing you from the ladders. You normally use arrows, but occasionally you will get what appears to be a ham hock, which you can shoot at the wolves. This ham hock will travel right through several enemies and knock them all down. Again, we have a very cute, entertaining little cutscene here. The second level is slightly more difficult. Here, the wolves are trying to reach the cliff above to get to the rock and push that rock down the cliff onto your head. One thing that makes this level a bit more difficult is there is occasionally a lighter colored pink wolf that's much more difficult to hit. Once enough wolves get near up to the top, they will knock the rock down over you. There's that pink wolf right there. You have to kill him before you actually can finish the level. And there we go. And of course, as you can imagine, there's also a bonus round as well, and these two levels simply repeat over and over again. Hopefully you enjoy this kind of old-school arcade action, because really you're not going to see too much of it for the Famicom after this. After this, you're only going to see a handful of these old 1980s arcade games ported for the Famicom. What you're going to see instead is actually quite a few side-scrolling platform-type games. Oddly enough, this game was actually published by Hudson Soft. I'm not really sure why this is. I do show that Konami actually developed this game. They were already publishing games for the Famicom, so why Hudson published this, I'm not really sure. This actually looks very, very similar to an MSX port of this game. I believe this Famicom version may have been based on the MSX version. I know that Hudson Soft published that as well. Other than that, there's not much to say about Pooyan other than its good old-fashioned arcade fun. And this is a port of Jaleco's 1985 arcade game, City Connection. Admittedly, it has some rather catchy music here. And this game actually doesn't really look half bad, at least for a Jaleco game. It's not nearly as colorful as the arcade version, but it looks pretty decent. In this game, you control a red Honda City, which is a kind of a hatchback that was only released in Japan. Apparently you have some sort of a paintbrush or something hooked up to the rear bumper because as you drive, you turn the road white. Naturally, the police want to put an end to your career of vandalism, so of course they don't really try to catch you, but they just sort of drive around randomly and you'll crash if you hit them. Luckily, the road is full of oil cans, which you can pick up and throw at police cars. This will allow you to knock them off the road. Far more dangerous than the police are the pink cats you occasionally come across in the middle of the road. Hitting one of those will end your little joyride. And this is really not a great game. Part of the problem is it's kind of difficult to control. What I'm trying to do here is actually to jump onto the next level, something that I personally find very difficult to do. Once you've painted the entire road, you'll move on to the next level. I believe this first level here is supposed to be in New York. One strange thing is I've read online that is, that the title was perhaps inspired by the Emmanuel Lewis song, City Connection. That's Emmanuel Lewis of TV's Webster fame. Supposedly this song was quite popular in Japan at this time and could have perhaps inspired the name of the game. I suppose that's possible, but it does seem a little unlikely to me. September of 1985's last game for the Famicom was Hypersport, and this is a port of the 1984 arcade game of the same name by Konami, which is a sequel to the 1983 arcade game Hyper Olympic. I discussed Hyper Olympic last episode, but a few things about that game will bear repeating here. Just like Hyper Olympic, Hypersport was missing a few games when ported to the Famicom. The arcade version had 7 events. The Famicom version only has 4. Swimming, horse racing, and weightlifting were cut from the home version. The first event is skeet shooting, as you see here. You simply hit the button and shoot the target as it goes into a little red box. The next event is the triple jump. You need to actually jump 3 times and try to land in the sand pit. You need to control the angle of each jump. After this is archery, and the last event is the pole vault. Now, something to remember is that Hyper Olympics was released in the U.S. under the arcade name of Track and Field. Naturally, the Famicom version, when ported to the N.E.S, was released under that name as well. However, the game for the N.E.S. we call Track and Field actually has both Hyper Olympic and Hyper Sports together. That is, it takes the 4 events from Hyper Olympic and the 4 events from Hyper Sports and puts them together into one game, so it's really sort of both games combined. Other than the events being different, Hyper Sports is really pretty much identical in style and feel to Hyper Olympic. Again, it's still a fun little game, something you can certainly practice and get better at. The world records are displayed at the end of the game, so you can, I guess your ultimate goal is to try to compete with those. Every time you complete all 4 events, the qualification becomes a little bit more difficult. Probably the trickiest event is the pole vault, as you can see here. You actually have to have pretty good timing on your jump in order to avoid hitting the bar. I finally made it there. So if you liked Hyper Olympic, I suspect you'll probably like this game as well. This is Route 16 Turbo by Sunsoft. Route 16 was a 1981 arcade game developed by Sunsoft and Temco. At that time, Temco was known as Tekken. Notice there's actually a difficulty selection option here, or rather level select as they call it. Now this game is sort of an enhanced port or remake of the original Turbo 16. Just like with Super Arabian, Sunsoft has added some additional features, upgraded the graphics, etc. for the Famicom version. Since this game originally came out in 1981, it's not surprising to see why they made a few changes to it. Now in this game you are controlling the blue-green car there. The object is to drive around the city, and on certain blocks you will find hidden some sort of treasure, usually a bag of yen or piece of jewelry, something along those lines. You have to collect all of those. Notice that this particular treasure actually changes from a bag of yen to an oil slick on occasion. Obviously the unusual thing about this game is sort of the dual screen selection here. You have both the wide view of the entire city, then you have the views of each individual maze. That's actually one of the annoying things about this game. At least when you first start playing a level and you exit from the maze out onto the main city, sometimes it's kind of hard to find your vehicle. You'll see this here as you enter or exit the maze. Where exactly are you? Well, it might take you a second to pick out the tiny turquoise dot that represents your vehicle on this large screen here. I've actually crashed a few times because I couldn't find my vehicle, and another car hit me while I was still looking for it. Now here we have the infamous swastika room maze. Not really sure what they were thinking when they came up with this one. So not the best game ever, but it's certainly not a bad game. It's a hell of a lot better than Super Arabian, that's for sure. In case you're wondering what the name Route 16 is actually referring to, well, there is a freeway that runs around Tokyo called Route 16. This game probably references that freeway. Real-time action adventure. Yes, this is Challenger by Hudson Soft. This is not a port of anything, this is actually an original for the Famicom, more or less. This game is really a bit of a cheat. It's actually a new game with an old game stuck on the beginning. One unique feature is the ability to choose among many different levels of difficulty. Of course, even the easiest is a little on the hard side. Now the first part here is called Stop the Express. You have a kidnapped princess in a train, and of course many pink birds attack you. Luckily you are equipped with many throwing knives. Now apparently your character here is some sort of Indiana Jones type adventurer. Now this first part of the game is basically a reworked version of an earlier game from 1983 by Hudson Soft called Stop the Express. This game was released for computers, Commodore 64s and Sinclairs and that sort of thing. The second, longer part of the game is very different. But what is interesting is that this game features a lot of horizontal scrolling, yet it came out only a month after Super Mario Bros. Obviously this can't be a coincidence. Hudson Soft had a pretty good relationship with Nintendo at this time, so I can only assume the developers of this game had access to an early version of Super Mario Bros. And sort of planned this game accordingly. Now the second and much longer part of the game is actually completely different. Oddly enough, this game features full vertical and horizontal scrolling, which was quite unusual at the time. In a lot of ways, this game is sort of a predecessor to Zelda, only much, much worse. Challenger is definitely not a good game. Aside from the choppy scrolling and stupid character animation, there are a lot of gameplay issues. Take the pink ghosts for example. They're much faster than you, your knives can't hurt them, and when they hit you, become immobile for a second, spinning around and around. This allows the ghost to hit you again. Other ghosts often move in and swarm you. Therefore, being hit by one of these things often means instant death. Oh yes, and when you see a power-up like that knife, don't touch it. It'll kill you. You actually have to throw a knife at it instead. When you come across the skeleton guarding the entrance to the ziggurat, you can't kill him using your knives. You have to randomly kill enemies until you just happen to come across one of the random power-ups that kills everything on screen. This wouldn't be so bad if there wasn't a timer. Once you're inside the ziggurat, you have to do a little annoying platforming in order to get what appears to be a piece of jewelry, but the game refers to as a keyword. Once you've located and obtained the 6 or 7 keywords in this game, you can go on to the final cave and face the final boss. This is a strange part. Arajigoku means antlion. Apparently you've fallen into a giant antlion sand trap. Japanese games seem to have some sort of fascination with antlions. Think of Phantasy Star, for example. The actual overworld on this game is pretty good sized, and you will spend some time looking for all the keywords. And the graphics, for example in the final level here, are actually pretty nice looking. What is odd is the way that the two parts of the game, the Stop the Express and this later exploration part, really don't seem to have anything to do with each other. It's a little strange the way you move from a modern Japanese commuter train to a strange world filled with pyramids, skeletons, and giant antlions. Still, Hudson Soft should get credit for trying to make a game as different and unique as this one. There was really nothing like it on the Famicom so far. And it is quite eerie the way the game seems to look forward to the Zelda. Too bad the game is so frustrating and unenjoyable to actually play. Even on the easiest level setting, the game is a little tough, mostly because of those damn frustrating pink ghosts. It doesn't really take too long to play through the game once, so it's definitely worth a look-see. Atypically, only 2 games, Route 16 Turbo and Challenger, were released for the Famicom in October of 1985. However, something else happened that month that made it one of the most significant months in Nintendo history. On October 18th, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in the United States. Nintendo had been looking to get the Famicom in the United States since 1983, even talking to Atari for a possible distribution deal at one point. Nintendo developed several prototypes for the US version of the Famicom, but US retailers showed no signs of interest. Eventually, Nintendo settled on the boxy, gray design that we all know and love. There were some design changes made. Famicom and N.E.S. cartridges were not compatible with each other, and US cartridges had a lockout chip that would prevent unlicensed games from being played on the machine. The controllers were now detachable, making them much easier to replace. Additionally, the microphone found on one of the Famicom controllers was scrapped. Unable to find anyone interested in distributing the NES in the United States, Nintendo decided to distribute it themselves, starting off with a test market of New York City. The original bundle available featured the console, ROB, and the light gun. The system sold quite well for the holiday season of 1985 in New York, around 90,000 units, thus prompting Nintendo to try to market in other cities, starting with Los Angeles in February 1986. 18 games were available on the launch. The 2 ROB titles, the 3 light gun titles, Super Mario Bros., Mach Rider, 10-Yard Fight, and numerous older titles are all available. The cover art was changed for all of these releases. Gone were the typical cartoony drawings on the front of the Famicom boxes, replaced by blown-up sprites from the games themselves. Over the next year, Nintendo released a handful of titles for the system, including some of their back catalog titles such as Urban Champion and Donkey Kong. Finally, in October of 1986, a few titles from outside developers were released in the United States, starting with a few from Bandai. Then in November, Capcom released a couple titles, such as 1942 and Ghosts and Goblins. Nintendo had some very strict rules regarding the licensing of titles for the NES. In order to assure consumers of the quality of the product, in the United States, every game for the Nintendo had Nintendo's seal of quality on it. Of course, this didn't stop a lot of terrible games from being released. By fall of 1986, the NES was available nationwide. It was a huge hit and was the hot item for Christmas of 1986. By the end of the year, it had sold 1 million units. Home video game consoles became popular once again. Nintendo totally dominated the field in the U.S., and within a few years, video games were once again a multi-billion-dollar business. Another great little musical theme here from Nintendo's Mach Rider. As you can see, this game has a few different play options. Take a look at the fighting course first. We're starting to see much more involved introduction scenes here. This one has a little bit of a plot integrated into it. It's sort of a science fiction themed behind the vehicle motorcycle racer. And your motorcycle is actually armed with some sort of machine gun, and the object, of course, is to not crash and to also shoot down enemy vehicles. The story behind Mach Rider involves Earth freeways being invaded by some sort of alien race. Your job is to cruise around on a motorcycle and wipe them out. Apparently, the freeways of the future are pretty trashed. There's oil barrels laying around everywhere, not to mention all kinds of oil puddles, water puddles, and rocks. Aside from enemy vehicles, you have to avoid these obstacles as well. Now, this game came out only around a month after Super Mario Bros., so it must have been developed around the same time. Of course, it's not nearly ambitious, but it's certainly not a bad little racer game. One unusual thing about this game is it was actually released in the United States before Japan. It was a launch title for the NES, didn't come out in Japan until November. Because this was a launch title for the N.E.S., this game probably has a better reputation than it actually warrants. I do love the way that it informs you that you are Mach Rider in between every single level, as if you would somehow forget. The controls in this game are decent, if not great. One thing is you do get to go awfully fast in this game. Once you're at top speed, you can actually barely see the track, and you often can't see things as you're going around corners. Of course, you can't really slow down easily either. If you slow down beyond 4th gear, cars will sneak up behind you and actually crash into you, as you see there. If nothing else, this game does have a very cool sort of death animation. One thing that is fascinating about this game is that this was the first sort of science fiction themed game Nintendo came out with. Now the other play modes, there is this one here in which you simply have to go through the level and beat a certain time. The last gameplay mode is where you go through a level in a certain time, but there's no additional opponents on the road. And just like Excitebike, there is a design option as well. So my final verdict on this game is that it's a decent little racing game, but perhaps not as good as its fans might think it is. In October of 1985, Nintendo had every reason to be happy. They had just released their crowning achievement for the Famicom, Super Mario Bros. They had completely dominated the Japanese video game market and were now preparing to do so in the U.S. At this time, they really had no competition. The Atari 2600 was still around, but it now seemed like an ancient relic compared to the Famicom. However, dark clouds were on the horizon. Ironically, on October 20th, a mere 2 days after the NES's debut in the United States, SEGA released their new 8-bit system, the SG-1000 Mark III, later to be known as the SEGA Master System. For the first time since the debut of the Famicom, Nintendo had a potential rival. SEGA was one of the major established Japanese arcade game designers, and the only one not releasing games for the Famicom. Amazingly, their first home console, the SG-1000 Mark I, predated the Famicom. It was test marketed in 1981. However, the Mark I was never widely distributed and really wasn't that interesting of a system. Not that many games were released for it. However, the Mark III was a whole nother story, as it was technically superior to the Famicom. While still an 8-bit system, the Mark III had a faster processor, better colors, and could more accurately reproduce the current arcade games. To see this, let's take a look at the Famicom version of Space Harrier. Certainly this looks very little like the original arcade game. Now compare it to the SEGA Master System version. As you can see, Nintendo should have every reason to be worried by the emergence of this new competitor. As it turns out, SEGA never claimed Nintendo's throne, but certainly gave them a good run for their money. Though it is widely considered to be a failure, the SEGA Master System actually sold quite well in Europe, Australia, and Brazil, eventually going on to sell around 13 million units. SEGA's next system, the Mega Drive/Genesis, was even more successful. In the early 90s, it even ended Nintendo's dominance of the North American market. SEGA officially left the home console market in 2001 with the failure of the Dreamcast. However, in 1985, they certainly must have worried Nintendo just a little. The Famicom was no longer the most technologically advanced system on the market, and suddenly they have a rival for video game consumers' money. Well, I don't even know where to begin with this one. This is Kinnikuman, published by Bandai, known as M.U.S.C.L.E in the United States. This is a wrestling game, and it's based on a very popular Japanese manga and anime. Kinnikuman is more or less about a group of superhero wrestlers. The name means muscle man in Japanese. In the United States, a series of the small toys were released under the name M.U.S.C.L.E, millions of unusual small creatures lurking everywhere. This was the first game for the Famicom released by Bandai. Bandai has been around since the 1950s and are primarily a company that licenses popular manga and cartoon characters into toys. They also do a little bit of manufacture and distribution of anime as well. However, they are not primarily a video game company, and this is what happens when companies start making games for the Famicom lured by the success of the console. You can very easily end up with utterly reprehensible games such as this one. This game certainly looks bad, but it also plays terribly. You control a team of wrestlers. This is actually tag team wrestling. You can go to the corner and call in the other teammate at any time if you wish. You only have two moves, a punch and a jump. Of course, there are variations on this. For example, if you jump against the ropes, you will jump backwards and perhaps knock your opponent over. You can also flip your opponent over your head and do sort of a pile driver. However, the mechanics and controls of this game are utterly terrible. One thing that happens here is occasionally some sort of little power-up ball will be tossed into the ring. If your computer opponent catches it, he'll probably instantly kill you. For example, this guy right here, when he gets it, does some kind of crazy fire attack and jumps on top of you, and you pretty much lose control of your character completely as your health is slowly drained away. There's really not much you can do if the other guy happens to catch this. And here's the US version M.U.S.C.L.E, slightly different character selection. One very intriguing thing about this game is this. Bandai didn't really develop their own video games. There actually is no developer listed on this game. It's rumored this game was actually developed by the infamous company Tosa. Tosa is a very large Kyoto-based company which has developed apparently over 1,000 games since first being formed around 1980 or so. And the unusual thing is Tosa never actually takes credit for these games. Video game companies or developers basically hire them when they want a game developed anonymously. Tosa's name does not appear on the packaging, and they will often go so far as to actually use fake programmer names in the credits. Reportedly, Tosa has actually developed a lot of Bandai's games. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why so many of Bandai's games are so terrible. Of course, the fact that tie-in games like this are usually just released very quickly, make a quick buck anyway, I'm sure also has something to do with it. I'd go so far as to say this is probably actually the worst game released for the Famicom so far. With a game this bad, you'd think Nintendo would do everything in its power to hide the fact that it exists. Incredibly, just the opposite occurred. When third-party games finally started coming out for the N.E.S. in October of 1986, this was actually one of the first 2 games released. Considering all the great games that were never released in the United States, this is utterly mind-boggling. The music to Sky Destroyer seems to be sort of a relative of the theme to Raiders of the Lost Ark. As you can see, this is a pseudo 3D aerial combat game. It looks a lot like Afterburner, which would come out in about 2 years after this. Of course, it's not nearly as exciting as Afterburner. Just like 1942, this game seems to take place during World War II, the Battle of the Pacific. Except in this case, you're a Japanese fighter battling U.S. forces. You have both a machine gun and a torpedo. What's the torpedo for? Well, every once in a while you'll come across a island or a... oops, they got shot down there. You'll come across an island or a naval vessel that you can fire torpedoes at. This game was released by Taito, and as far as I can tell, it's not a port of an earlier game. Major developers like Taito are just now starting to develop games specifically for the Famicom. One problem with this game is it's actually a little bit on the formless side. There really aren't levels or anything like that. You just sort of fly around forever shooting planes. A nice little detail is that the sky changes color from day to night to dusk to dawn, etc., etc. And occasionally you come across little bonus rounds like those red planes that is shot down, and sometimes even sort of like a boss type thing. You'll get like either a ship like this you have to torpedo, or you'll come across a large bomber. You have to shoot out all of the bomber's engines. This is kind of difficult as they tend to run away pretty quickly. Ah, there's a bomber now. So while I really wouldn't call this a bad game, I'd say the lack of variety makes it just a little bit on the boring side. And it's certainly not anywhere nearly as exciting as Afterburner. I will admit the pseudo 3D graphics are pretty good for this vintage. Our next game is Ninja Jajamaru Kun. This is sort of a sequel to Jellicoe's Ninja Kun. Unlike Ninja Kun, this game isn't based on an arcade game. It appears to be an N.E.S. or rather a Famicom original. This was never released in the United States, of course. I had always assumed that this character was the same character that was in Ninja Kun. However, the Wikipedia article on this game states it's actually Ninja Kun's little brother. He looks exactly like the guy in Ninja Kun, so it's really hard to say, but I guess I'll take their word for it. This is the first in this series of Ninja Jajamaru games. There's actually quite a few of them, and they're still making them to this day for some reason. Well, it's not really a bad game. This is one of those games that only has a couple different levels that just sort of repeat indefinitely. The foes get harder and harder. Oddly enough, this is yet another game that came out around the same time as Super Mario that features a kidnapped princess. That's her up at the top there, Princess Sakura. The object is to rescue her. Well, you actually do that by killing all the enemies off on each screen. You can then go on to the next screen. You can find a lot of like little hidden bonuses in the little brick walls that separate the floors. The gameplay mechanics are pretty similar to Ninja Kun. You can stun an enemy by hitting them, and then you can actually take them out by using your little throwing star on them. A few things have been added to this game from Ninja-kun. For example, the princess drops little power-ups that you can catch. Things that'll make your weapon travel further or make you run faster. However, one of the coolest things is that if you collect enough power-ups, you can use your ninja magic to summon a giant toad. This will actually eat enemies. Well, first of all, it'll freeze enemies on the screen, then your toad can eat them all. This is definitely the coolest magical power in the game. Also, if you catch enough of the little floating objects that the princess drops on you, you will occasionally go into like a bonus round where you can actually fight the pirate that kidnapped her. This little mini-game sequence here reminds me of Satan's Hollow. It's actually not required, you don't have to, it's purely like an optional little mini-game that doesn't have any effects on the main game. After you defeated the pirate and you rescue the princess, things will return to normal afterwards. And just like in Ninja-kun, as you progress, the enemies get stronger and stronger. The enemies that started off as like bosses will eventually become the primary enemy in the level. Here you have these little crazy umbrella demon things. Now when you kill someone, like their ghost will appear, and you can get some bonus points by grabbing the ghost. So I think I find this game a little more fun than the original Ninja-kun. It's hardly spectacular, but certainly it's a cute way to kill a bit of time. One thing that's interesting about the Famicom is we'll often see a series of games come out all around the same time that have something very similar in common. For example, Challenger just came out, and here we have immediately afterwards another game that features full horizontal and vertical scrolling. Of course, this game is even less interesting than Challenger. This is Onyanko Town, released by Pony Canyon. If you're not familiar with Pony Canyon, well, it's a rather strange name, but they are actually a major Japanese record label. Pony Canyon has been around for years, but in the early 80s they decided to try their hand at releasing video games. I don't know who actually developed this, if it was Pony Canyon or if they used another company such as Toza. There's no other names on the credits. The lack of original music is one of the tip-offs to the low-budget nature of this game. It's simply an arrangement of Mussorgsky's Ballet of Chicks in Their Shells from pictures at an exhibition. The gameplay idea here is very simple. You're a mother cat, your kitten has wandered away, you've got to roam the town, grab it and bring it back to your house. Along the way you'll face dogs wearing overalls. Now you might think, well, cats are pretty fast, they can run, jump, climb over fences. Your character should be able to move around with a lot of speed, but definitely not. The mother cat moves at a very deliberate pace. Maybe she's encumbered by the dress and apron she's wearing. However, she does have one advantage over real cats, namely the power to telekinetically move manhole covers. Pressing the button while your character is facing a manhole cover will cause the cover to open up and you can trap enemies inside. You can also fall into the manhole cover yourself. It's also possible to jump over an enemy while you're not carrying your kitten in your arms. Once again, this game is an original for the Famicom. It wasn't released on any other systems as far as I know. And overall, the game is pretty forgettable. One thing you might not like about it is the amazingly slow speed at which your character moves. The simplicity of this game makes me think that maybe it was actually intended for children. Well, granted the game is sort of cute, it's probably not something you'd actually want to play. The fact that it's so very, very slow, rather repetitive, sort of boring, and then of course you have that 10-second musical theme repeated over and over and over again, you'll probably want to stay clear of this game. I haven't played this game too extensively, but there doesn't really seem to ever be any variation in the gameplay. Once you get your kitten back home, you start a new level, but I don't think the levels really change at all other than the color. The enemies and the basic gameplay remains the same. Well, if you didn't like Onyanko Town, you're probably not going to like this game anymore. This is Pachicom, and yes, this is a pachinko video game. Pachinko is Japan's national hobby/gambling addiction, and it's really not surprising that there is a certain amount of demand for pachinko video games. Now, this game will probably not interest you at all, even for 10 seconds, but maybe you're interested in how pachinko actually works. Well, what it is this. You start off by buying a bunch of little silver balls. In this case, you start off with 100. They go into the machine, and you shoot them out using the little knob. There's like a pressure knob. You can see it represented here by that little blue circle. You use the D-pad to control the pressure. Ball bearings that fall into the slot at the bottom are lost, but those that fall in certain pockets will actually win you additional ball bearings. The object of the game is to wind up with more little ball bearings that you started out with. Then you can redeem your extra ball bearings for prizes, or unofficially, cash. This game is a lot less interactive than pinball. The only thing you actually control is the pressure with which little ball bearings get shot out at. From there, it's really just a matter of luck. This game lets you choose between a couple different types of pachinko machines. Now, you may have noticed this game was actually released by Toshiba EMI, another major Japanese record company. I don't think they developed the game. There is a JPM listed on the title screen. Unfortunately, I have no idea who they are. They must be a small developer contracted to actually design this game. Luckily, you'll probably find the last game this episode to be a bit more interesting than this. Alright, from Namco, it's a port of their 1984 arcade classic, Pac-Land. This was released the same day as Pachicom and Onyanko Town, but this is a much more interesting game. Now, the original arcade Pac-Land was really one of the pioneering horizontal platform games. Pac-Land was certainly not the first horizontal side-scrolling platformer, but it was perhaps the most popular and the most influential of these early games. Certainly a lot of the concepts in Super Mario Bros. Originally sprung from this game. The object is to get Pac-Man from his house to Fairyland, which is located on the far right-hand side of the world. You're actually escorting a lost fairy back to Fairyland, but that's not really made clear in this particular port. In the arcade version, you can see that Pac-Man is keeping the fairy under his hat. Along the way, you'll have to avoid various ghosts, collect cherries for points, and occasionally find a Pac-Man power pill. Now, this is a cool little game, but you might find yourself taking issue with the controls. The original arcade game didn't have a joystick, it only had buttons. This Famicom port actually sort of replicates the unusual control scheme. The right button makes you move right, the left button makes you move left, and to jump, you hit the D-pad in any direction. This backwards control scheme is actually rather counterintuitive, as you can imagine. And unfortunately, I think that the graphical downgrade required by the Famicom makes this game lose a certain amount of its charm. The sprites are a lot smaller, and this version doesn't really have that same sort of cartoony graphical appeal that the original arcade version had. For example, in the arcade version, when you finally get back to your house, the entire Pac-Man family comes out to greet you. That's missing in this version. Or, for example, I mentioned earlier the fairy that you keep underneath your hat. We see here a lot of the sort of typical basic platforming that marks this game. When you actually get to Fairyland, you get a pair of magical boots that allow you to sort of jump in mid-air. This helps you get back to your home a lot easier because a lot of the bridges and whatnot are now missing. Looks like I fell right through the platform there. Here we are in Fairyland finally. And now we're on the way back home. So Pac-Land is certainly worth playing at least a little bit. If you've never played the game, it's certainly an important game in the history of platformers. I would definitely recommend trying it, but really it is definitely not up to the same level as the arcade game, unfortunately. If nothing else, it's worth playing to observe the influence this game had on Super Mario Bros.